cannot invent and pioneer if you cannot accept failure.
We wanted people that were insanely great at what they did.
Nobody was making any money at all. Most people thought the internet was going to be a fad.
All right, today on the podcast, I have someone who I've been a fan of for a while, been reading his content. We're in a engaging Slack community together. I was going through a big hire, and he was kind enough to kind of show me how he's made some hires in the world of sales and biz dev. And so he's been super helpful. But today we have Sam Shepler on. So Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and so we have a lot we're going to talk about. This idea of a Launchpad business. You've acquired a couple companies, so this idea of acquisition entrepreneurship. But before we even get into it, could you kind of introduce yourself and give a little background of what you've been up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So, going back to college, I kind of got the entrepreneurship bug when I read the 4-Hour Workweek, just like a lot of people, right? I was like, oh, this is like a different path, right? There's like, I don't have to necessarily follow the default path. I, basically, kind of randomly, ended up working for an entrepreneur as during college. I worked for a guy who ran a big e-commerce Halloween store. And I was kind of just like his intern / do anything, but and honestly, like just seeing like how entrepreneurship was just like this incredibly intellectually stimulating, kind of puzzle and challenge. Like I just loved it. Like also frankly, working for him, I was like, okay, like this guy has a multi-million-dollar business. Like he's a smart guy, but it's like, it's not like, all this stuff is doable. Right. So like, I think that kind of, gave me some confidence. I was like, okay, there's no reason I can't do this. And then basically, started out, just doing whatever I could. And my skill set and my background was video production. So I was actually going to school for film at the time. And, I'd grown up in Vermont making snowboarding videos. So like I had this basically like the beginning of like a valuable skill, which is something I think is so crucial. It's like always understanding, like when you're starting, from zero, it's like step one is like, how can you build like valuable skills? You know what I mean? And then, basically at the end of college, had me and two of my close friends, we had, basically started a video production company kind of like accidentally, and had enough customers to just go straight into that. That was around 2012. We grew that for, 4 years, kind of just a generalist agency, a lot of ups, a lot of downs, I'll experience the pitfalls of being a generalist agency and the sort of, stress that can bring, and like not being able to kind of remove myself from the business at all. Not to mention, there's so many things I just didn't know at that point, but had the opportunity, basically we got the company, we all kind of agreed like we can't do this anymore. And also like co-founder relationships is tough, right? It's like, that's another thing, right? So like things were good, I think we were almost close to like $1 million run rate at that time. And we're like, all right, like let's get this acqui-hired and basically like sell the company. We managed to do that. It was a pretty good outcome, honestly, for, first go at it. We sold the company to a large, national PR firm who was doing like a bolt-on. We positioned it as like, you're growing in video production, just like do like this bolt-on acquisition of us, get our customers, get our team instead of like hiring piecemeal, right? So like that's another thing, whether you're like buying or selling a company, it's like it's all about like the positioning, right? And there's like the story that you tell around it. So we got that done. Ended up leaving that company, about less than a year into it. I just wanted to do my own thing again. And then I was like, okay, like how can I sort of like maybe do something a bit more productized, right? So I thought about, okay, like of all the video projects that we were doing at our more generalist agency, I was like, if I was going to map out like what is the most valuable to the customer, and then also the most scalable, and like where is the intersection of like something that's extremely valuable to the customer and also like relatively scalable that I can put a process behind it, right? As well as like repeatable, right? It's got to be something ideally that it's not like they only need it like once every 4 years, like, right? Like, so that's how I ended up with customer testimonial videos. I found that they were, valuable, repeatable, and, relatively scalable. And then in 2018, started TestimonialHero. Basically have, grown that, over the past, I guess like 4 going on 5 years now, into the 5th year. And yeah, it's grown bigger and faster than I thought, particularly in the last couple of years. And we can, get into why that might be the case. But and yeah, then recently, installed a general manager, have a fantastic GM, Kevin. He's my GM. He's fantastic, and that's a new step in the journey is that I'm pretty new into. Like I just started that, the beginning of 2022. So I'm about a quarter into like this new sort of role where like I have, a GM and in theory should be stepping back a bit more, right?
Dude, there's so much good stuff there. And so, first, one call out is like you want to have a key skill to use to launch something. And I will say, people want to hate on service businesses and agencies, and it's easy to. It's not as scalable as SaaS, but it is the quickest thing you can do to make $1. Like you can go to LinkedIn right now and be like, I have a video production agency. Who wants to work with me? And if you have a decent reputation, you could close someone on the spot. So that's kind of your entry point. You get this up to like $1 million, but you kind of see like what when you're a journalist agency, it's hard to really scale when it's not repeatable. It's a lot of custom work. But you did something really well where I don't think a lot of people would able to do that acqui-hire, where you talk about you found the right partner and were able to position to them in a way that's beneficial for them. Were you proactive in finding the buyer, or did they find you?
So I was proactive. I sent them a call. Well, first I built a prospect list, like who would be good prospects to go out and basically pitch this. And then I sent a cold LinkedIn message to not the not the highest, not like the CEO, but like someone who I knew would like have the CEO's ear and also like would have a higher chance getting back to me. I think it was one of the VPs. And I basically pitched it just straight up in that message. And exactly how I went about it is exactly like why they did it. And the key thing though is like I was paying attention, and I had been following them. I had this hypothesis for multiple years that if we were ever going to sell the company, this was one of the companies that we would sell to. And because I saw that, I mean, we were actually starting to compete with them in some cases. I saw that they were, traditionally a PR firm. They're working on building this video capacity. So when I went to pitch them, they were like, okay, yeah, like you're correct. Your analysis is spot on. Like we are trying to do more with video, and like can't argue with your logic. Like, so yeah, I think that's exactly how I went about doing it. And, that the key is like, just like any sale, right? It's like the more you can demonstrate that understanding of like what their goals are, the better the conversation is going to go.
Dude, that's so impressive. I'd love to see that cold email that essentially turned into them buying your company. But it's the fact that you knew them, you knew what they cared about, and you could play to either like their hopes or even their fears of what they're trying to do going forward. And you don't have to get into the financials, but like people that are looking to sell their business, can you speak to anything around the terms? Like, was it straight up cash, or did you have an earnout? Or did you have like golden handcuffs where you had to stay on for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, for sure. I was I was almost going to go on LinkedIn and see if I still have the message, and I'm sure I do. I could probably find it. But yeah, so again, like this was definitely an acqui hire, like in like not a straight up acquisition. So like it was, I'll speak to the acqui-hire situation, and then I'll speak to like what you might be able to expect, in a more normal situation. Um, for us, like it was basically what I was looking for was like a couple things. Like one, a little bit of money. Great. Like the most money we can get, the better. But like I was also looking for like a good, soft landing, and frankly, like something that's good for my like entrepreneurial story at the time, right? I didn't know if I was going to what I was going to do, if I was going to like, um, do next, and I think that was like important to at least get like some like notch on my belt. So in our situation, basically, it was definitely like like an earnout kind of component, like for sure. I'm trying to think back. So like we got comped on basically like revenue targets if we accomplish them, and that was like what our bonus was tied to, and that and so it was like totally possible like we wouldn't like achieve the earnout. But another benefit at that time, frankly, was like we were a couple of years out of college. We weren't really paying ourselves like all that much. So it was like a pretty, cool, like, all right, we're going to get like, 6-figure salary. And like, this is like, that was cool. Really exciting at the time as well.
Totally. And just to go through that rep of starting something, selling it, and I mean, that's really exciting experience to have at that phase of your career. So, but you kind of see, and I feel like myself as an agency owner, we see it as well. Like there can be great things about that big agency model, whereas you're generalist and doing custom work, but it can be exhausting. It can be really tough to do stuff that's always cost custom. Whereas you now have this path of productized service, and you've started to hit on some of those like best practices for it. But if you were starting a productized service today, can you kind of hit on what are the key things you want to have in place? Because you already said some that I want to make sure people like heard you say, like for the client, what is the most valuable to them, but also scalable to you, but also what's repeatable? Because with productized service, it's all about that retention, right? And having recurring revenue come in. But like, what are other must-haves you'd want to have in place when starting a productized service?
Yeah. So other must-haves, I think, first and foremost, I like to look at, kind of like the overall like market timing and like understand like, how can I ride like a wave, whether that is like a wave of, everyone's using Webflow, like we can, build our productized service around like building people, great, Webflow sites, or like it's more of like a thematic wave around like everyone's no one's reading in case studies anymore, we all need video testimonials, right? Which is obviously more of my approach. So I got first and foremost, like always like to think about like, okay, why now, right? Like why, like, and how is there sort of like a wave behind this idea, right? Then I also like to think of like what is what is like the average order value, and like is it significant? Because this is also like something that a lot of people think productized services, and they think really cheap kind of like monthly subscription for unlimited offshore labor doing like kind of like menial task, like design or whatever. So like, and there's a reason for that. Like a lot of the like some of the earliest productized services were like kind of like unlimited like WordPress bug fixes, right, for like $99 a month. And but I think now we've sort of moved into what I call like productized era 2.0, where like you can have, and I would argue you should have like a more premium productized service. Because for the reason that average order value is so important to me is because, as Jim, like your AOV really dictates the marketing strategies and channels that you can run profitably. And like, if you don't have a good AOV, you better be super happy to like build an organic audience. And like, be really good at it. And that's very hard. It's not like something that I'm sort of impatient. Like I want to be able to, do things that, for me, like support, outbound sales teams. Cause, that has been, and just like outbound in general, as well as sales calls. So another thing that I think was like productized 1.0, it was like, don't, sell a service without having to hop on a sales call. My perspective is like, sell a service that easily supports the economics of a sales call, right? So basically, so that's super important. Let's see. I mean, also just going back to like, do I understand the market? And also like, why me? Like I, in general, like I like to do things that I have like a competitive advantage in. So like most of the time, like I would guess, like if I start any other productized services, they're just going to be in video, right? Because I have a huge, competitive advantage because I'm, kind of wired for video. Like I've always loved it. That being said, I mean, I think, maybe for folks, they don't have that very specific thing, in a couple months or like a year, you can become, really like top 10% in anything, right? You can, if you put in the work, right? If you put in a lot of work, there's all the information is out there, so, and then the last thing I'll say is like, I always think about like, how can I kind of layer on, different sort of expertise to really form a really unique competitive mix. So like there's this concept, I think it's called like talent stacking. And it's basically saying like, if you can, maybe you're not the best, like it's like the creator of Dilbert kind of, coined it. He's like, I'm not the best cartoonist in the world, but like, I'm actually the best like cartoonist who also like worked in like corporate America and like understands that. And like, I'm pretty funny. So like, all of a sudden like you get like smash hits because like he's like really like layered on some like unique mix. So like for me, I was like, I'm not the best videographer in the world, but I actually really understand B2B sales and marketing, and kind of always like that. I always kind of gravitated to that. And already right there you have a pretty unique mix, because like a lot of video producers and video editors and video creatives, like they're not necessarily like really, they're not, close to world class B2B, marketers. And I would consider myself, at that level. So like, I would basically, it's like, how can you, build these really unique, combinations that actually, make you so, different. And there's a lot we could, dig into there, but that's a really helpful way that I think of it.
I love that idea of talent stacking, because it can be a lot of pressure to be like, oh, I'm doing video work, I have to be the best video editor in the world. It's like, no, you can kind of niche down and like, where else are you strong? And if you combine those, it's like you become this kind of little unicorn in this space where you can really thrive. Because I think people sometimes aren't even aware of where they have strengths until they have like go through an exercise like that to figure it out. No, that's a really good call out. And so, you've been very open as far as like with TestimonialHero, you've grown it from 0 to 4 million in 4 years. You've installed your GM, and you've kind of also written about this idea of this like founder sales bottleneck. Can you just talk about like what you've learned like growing to that scale? Because here you initially had this agency, it was tough, you got it to 7 figures. But now you have this productized service where you've like 4x that. I'd love to know like what worked to drive new customers, and then also the inflection point of hiring a GM. Because I'm kind of, as I'm trying to fire myself from different tasks, I'm very interested in to learn that. So kind of two questions in one there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, one of the big keys that, was just like the business model. And so we grew from, a million to 3.4 million. Like I think 2020 we did like a million, and like 2021 we did 3.4. And well, one of the reasons was, we basically at that point like launched a new product around remote testimonial videos. And of course, in 2020, that was, when we had the COVID pandemic, and so like remote was critical, right? Like actually before COVID, our business model was more of like a global network, Uber for video testimonials. Your in-person videographer shows up at your office, and like actually even that I think was like is worth noting, because like in the agency we were literally flying around to film. That's what agencies do usually. Like, they're like, oh, you hire us, we're gonna fly there and we're gonna make it great, and it's gonna be expensive for you, and but it's gonna be good. And then basically like that was a huge scale bottleneck, because for so many reasons, like, it's like we can't be in two places at once. So like when I started Testimonial Hero, basically I just thought of like, okay, what are all the scale bottlenecks, and how can we engineer the business model to minimize them, right? That was one thing. It was a better model. And then we with when COVID happened, we made the best of that challenging situation, and like did the kind of obvious thing, which was like launch the product that fit in that new situation. So like that absolutely contributed to so much growth. And like that, I think, it just underscores how important timing is, and I think there's a lot of luck in that. But there's also like, you also need the awareness to, capitalize when you see those opportunities. Right. And so I think, yeah, timing, and thinking about just like how you can, make a better business model. And then just from a sales and marketing side and the founder sales bottleneck, we've done, probably more with outbound sales than probably any other, productized service or agency that I'm aware of. Like I think last year, probably about over $1 million of our revenue came from, leads that we sourced outbound. And, we could get into that, but, one of the reasons that we were able to do that also because we had a productized service, like, and we were able to like pitch a very specific offering to a very specific pain point, right? Because it's really hard to do good outbound for a generalist agency. Now you can always, have a generalist agency, and you can go outbound and present like one of your core like signature solutions. But basically, yeah, like we just went super aggressive with outbound, and like that's another thing that like when I see something that works, like I don't like 2x it. I literally will 10x it until it stops working, right? So I think like that's, and like it took me a while to like figure that out, like because I thought like doing more of something when it was working was like doing twice as much, but like when you have something that's working, I realized like there's no participation trophies in for using more marketing channels. Like, it's really like you just, if you have a channel that's working, like just don't stop and scale it up as far as you can until it stops working. And that was like kind of like, what we did. Of course, all these things are sort of like arbitrage opportunities in a sense. Like I think, there maybe the spam filters have improved, and like nowadays I'm not sure like we could have done what we did, but we're launching another cold email campaign, so we will see, and we will see very shortly. But and then yeah, I think
Wait,
from the
let me
sales
jump
side,
in.
like we had.
Sorry to interrupt. Let me jump
Go
in there
ahead.
because you said a quote that I think I need to turn into a poster in my office. Like, you don't get any participation trophies for standing up multiple marketing channels. I'll have to go back and pull it, but I could not agree with that more. Like, so many times companies like they have one thing that kind of works, but like, oh wait, but we got to launch Pinterest ads, or we've got to launch LinkedIn ads, or we got to do whatever. It's like, no, it's like squeeze the most out of that. And so I mean, you've generated 1 million from cold outreach. So many people tried that and fail. Like, what are some tips you would give? Because you sold your company through cold email with the LinkedIn message, and you've generated 1 million through it. Like, any like best practices or recommendations on that?
Yeah. So, well, I think there's a couple things. Like when cold outreach isn't working for people, well, it's hard because there's so many variables, right? But a few of the variables is like, the offer's not good enough, or like they're not segmenting the market, the right way. Like they're selling something to, too broad a market where they need like, specific cold email campaigns to each persona, right? So like, there's the copywriting element of it, and like that's definitely like one of my strengths is copywriting, I would say. More specifically, I think with cold email, like you really have to, or at least what we've done is like we sort of, we don't like, I hate cold emails when they try to be clever and assumptive, and that's like a lot of cold emails that we all get, right? It's like, basically we just say, hey, like here's what we can do for you. We've done it for 300 plus other companies, including these companies. Then we have a line that probably addresses whatever, question or objection they might have at that point. Like for us, it's like, we can do this on site or remotely with just 45 minutes from your customer. Great. Like just the most common objection. And then like, follow it up with like, some usually a pretty soft call to action, especially, it's like, well, if someone's actually interested, like what do they realistically like want to do at this point? Right. Do they want to jump on a call immediately? Probably not. Like, so like, we don't usually like push for a call. We try to just push for something that will like start a conversation. Right. And like, for example, for us, it's something like, seeing if they're willing to take a look at some examples or some more information. Right. Now we have the infrastructure to nurture, those leads with, our kind of like, sales development reps. So like a lot of people, can't sort of take that long game because like, because they maybe they don't have the infrastructure to do that. So like there's other aspects of this, but yeah, I think it's mostly having a good offer, and not being trying to be too clever, and just kind of respecting the people that you're emailing, time, like, and also respecting their intelligence, right?
No, totally agree. I get so turned off from those, but I mean, we've hired services and people from cold email when it does exactly what you say. But that's really helpful. So you've clearly figured out how to acquire and retain customers. You've now done something where you've been able to create a business that can run without you, right? And you've hired a general manager. Can you talk through that experience, what has worked and not worked to do that? Because that's so hard for people to give up their baby, and to like trust that it'll run the way you want it to run.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think, I'll just tell a quick story. So this summer, my wife and I had our first kid, and yeah, I was able to take like 2 months off for paternity leave, and like that was amazing. And like it was just like, and the business grew like without me. So like that was like, honestly, that's one of my proudest accomplishments, I guess, as an entrepreneur, like as a service-based business owner, like just getting the business to the point where it could do that. And that is, I think, it's important for people to realize like it's totally possible. Like it's especially, with the right degree of productization, and honestly, it's the right team, right? So like it's all about, the people that you have, and, actually having a management layer, having like a leadership team, because like otherwise it's impossible. Like regardless if you get to like the GM point, and regardless if anyone's listening to this gets to that point, it's like even first, it's like just think about building more of a leadership team, and your quality of life is just will be increased so much. And then in terms of like things I learned, what went well, what didn't go well, I think like well, for us, I we promoted from within, which I think is that's my only experience, but I think that works a lot better in general, because I think it would just be really hard. It can be really hard to find someone from the outside at the right price, who can just hop into the seat and like, perform. It's just like you're probably gonna like you might find them, but it might take a couple tries. So like first and foremost, I would say like try and find ideally make it like a promote from within situation. And it was a conversation that my GM and I we had been having for over a year before. So it was like an ongoing thing. I asked him over a year before, or maybe even like a year and a half, and I was like, hey, like, would this be something that you'd be interested in? And he's like, yeah, I'd be really interested in that. And then we slowly just worked towards that plan, giving him more responsibility, and obviously he did a fantastic job and demonstrated that he was ready. I think some things that maybe didn't, or some speed bumps or like some challenges were like, I definitely underestimated, like once he was officially in place, like I definitely underestimated, and I wasn't on maternity leave. I definitely underestimated like the kind of the vacuum of, not being, quite as needed. I think it's just like inevitable. That happens. There's a lot, but that's kind of like a champagne problem, in a lot of ways, but like, definitely, yeah, it's like, you will like, it will be kind of weird, and you kind of have to figure out like analyze your relationship like to the business. That being said, now our head of marketing actually, just left. So, a couple of weeks ago. So like right now I'm like kind of like, oh, I'll put on that hat again. And, in the meantime, while we find that person. So now I'm like all happy again. I have something to do. Right. But yeah. So I think like the other thing, huge learning was like, we thought we had the right KPIs in place, in general, for the business, like, but like, we just learned, pretty recently, we're like, okay, we had like, we were using our P&L as like the scoreboard, but like, you can't really like run your business. Your P&L is not actually a scoreboard. Like you need the right, leading indicators, and you need to like watch, those metrics like a hawk. And like, we definitely like, got a little caught off guard on some things because we were looking at the wrong stuff. And, now we were like, oh shit, we know, actually what we were supposed to be looking at. But like, it sounds obvious, and like everyone hears it like, oh, you got to have the right KPIs, you got to have the right metrics. But like, we thought we did. And then we actually had to turn the dial a little bit. So yeah, that's probably one of my biggest learnings. And like, there's still so much that like we're figuring out there, on the KPI side.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's a great call on leading indicators versus lagging indicators, right? Like with our agency, we're looking at how many client calls we're doing, how many leads have come in to like project the pipeline. And like, it's a little tough with clients where we'll be looking at like NPS and just like performance of how ads and CRO is doing. But I could not agree more with that. But yeah, you got some champagne problems if you're like, oh, what to do with my time because the company is running so well. So I have very little sympathy for you. That's amazing. So one thing that like we're kind of like circling in on is you've done something that people probably aren't even familiar with this phrase, but you've kind of been able to build a really cool portfolio of companies and just a nice kind of like career with this idea of doing it on the back of like a Launchpad business. So before we even like go down like what you've done with that, can you just define like what is a Launchpad business anyways, and how is that different from say a lifestyle business?
Yeah, I think like the main thing with a Launchpad business is that it sort of exists to give you a lot of options, right? A lot of, runway, and just the ability to sort of, it frees you up to basically try other things. If you want, like you can take, you can sort of like take swings and, make some other asymmetric bets. I'm starting to do that with a information product course business, and I have a couple other things that are cooking as well. But yeah, so I first heard of this term, from Andrew Wilkinson, from Tiny, and he is obviously, I'm sure he's familiar to many of the listeners. And But yeah, the basically like the way that he explained it, is like, the first thing you should probably do is like, just make sure you have something, to kind of cover your expenses and gives you runway to like, keep, taking swings, keep getting at bats. Right. And the reason why I think it's like a powerful idea is, it reminds us as entrepreneurs that, you don't have to try and shoot the moon with your first business or like any business. And you can, use this launchpad to, first establish the launchpad, right? Like if you really want to be an entrepreneur and first establish the launchpad, then like, if you want to like launch some rockets off it, like, great. Like, but you can do that and you have like, it's just less risky. Right. And instead of trying to, do that, moonshot right away. Or at least, just knowing like the odds of success and what you're getting into. And then also I think service-based businesses can make fantastic launchpad businesses. Because like you were saying earlier, they're so much easier to, generate revenue with, very quickly. And yeah, so basically I'm a big fan of, you know, launchpad businesses. And, I think it's service businesses sometimes don't get the love that they should, but they make a great launchpad to, either, keep growing that business. And, maybe it can be a lot bigger than you think. And it's certainly, in many cases, many people it has been, but also, yeah, to take those other, other swings and try some other things as well.
Yeah, so it's like that launch, and that's such a good call because, man, if I would have had to, with my first crack at a company, go for the moon or the huge idea, there's no doubt it'd be an epic failure. So it's like the first time you're being a business owner, go for something where the likelihood of success is much higher. And so it might not have a $1 billion outcome, but it can have a nice 7 or 8 figure outcome, right? So like you said, the service based business is a great launch pad because likelihood of success is higher. It's not capital intensive and it can cash flow, which kind of leads to your point of you are able to break away from the 9 to 5, have this launch pad. You can then make cash flow to invest in other things. And that's where like you and I have to all of a sudden become good capital allocators. Like, okay, wait, crap. Where do you put this money so it can help get to that next thing to generate a better ROI? And so I'd be interested because you've done some really smart things where, you have your productized service working really well, but you've started to make bets and other things. Some you're public about, some you just kind of said you're kind of working on. Can you give more color on how you think of this like stair step model with like Launchpad, like what you're looking to invest in and do next?
Yeah. So, and I love that the way you put it on in terms of just like not having to breaking free from the 9 to 5, right? I think that's exactly it, right? It's like step one is if you want to be an entrepreneur is kind of break free from the 9 to 5 and get that launch pad. And yeah, so some other things that you know I'm doing, well, to be honest, like I'm still like pretty bullish on Testimonial Hero, and like I do think there is a potential that we might be like, all right, like, well, which is the great thing about a launchpad business is like you can always like turn the launchpad into a rocket if you want. Like, there's just like that you sort of have the option, right? Whereas like a lifestyle business, we talked about, launchpad versus lifestyle. Lifestyle business is like a small business that supports your lifestyle, but like probably doesn't have a lot of scalability, and like nothing wrong with that either. It's just like I think that is a characteristic of launchpad businesses is you have more optionality to scale up further if you want it. So yeah, definitely considering a few things. What would it look like to take Testimonial Hero to a much larger size? Obviously that would require a lot of my attention and sort of like would be kind of a deviation from the launchpad. But it's an option, right? But in the meantime, I actually acquired a course around productized services at the end of February. It's called Productize and Scale, productizeandscale.com. it was a fantastic course business from founded by a guy named Brian Castle. He had grown it, and basically he actually, his story is fantastic. Where he had his Launchpad businesses, their productized services, he ended up, kind of selling them. Took a couple swings at SaaS companies, and because he had the service, Launchpad, like he was able to try. I think he tried like 3 or 4 SaaS companies, and like final and or this his newest one, Zip Message, is like taking off. So I think that's a great like kind of like Launchpad case study. So he really wanted to go in on SaaS, and he saw me tweeting about productized services more, and he actually approached me. He's like, "Hey, I saw you've been talking a little bit more about productized services. Like, would you be interested in like acquiring this?" And I was basically just like, yes, like, let's do it. I'd always wanted to, dip my toe into the sort of like information product world. And like, this has been a great way to do it. Like, it's great to get some of the benefits, but without, just kind of skipping steps. Right. And that's kind of what any sort of acquisition you do, you're just, you get to sort of skip some steps along the way in exchange for, of course, like the cost and the investment in it.
Dude, that's super exciting. And I want to get into like why you chose kind of an information e-course business, because I have some friends that have done extremely well with those. And some of them are like, oh, there's so many courses and options out there. Is that right? But when you look in the margins, it's quite powerful, because your margins after you make it are very, very good. It's even better than a SaaS company, right? Because you don't have like these big servers and dev costs tied to it. So talk about like, what was it a no brainer, or what were your concerns with acquiring this? Because obviously like this company was kind of attached a little bit to the previous founder. However, it wasn't his name. It's, productize and scale, something that very much aligns with what you do, but kind of go through like your thought process, like what's a good decision? What were your concerns?
Yeah. So I think first on the business model, I think, yes, like in terms of like, if you don't have a SaaS, if you like background, I think like, which I don't like, I think information products are probably like the next logical step. And like, I actually think it's really hard to have a great SaaS product if you don't have a technical background, or a huge audience, or like have some unfair advantage. And I personally, I don't feel I have an unfair advantage for SaaS. So I was like, well, how can I get SaaS like economics? And for sure, the answer is like information products, and also like just seemed like a fun challenge. In terms of how I thought about it, you know, I thought about it in really in a way of like, how can I, well, like what could go wrong here? I like, and like, what's the downside, and like, is the downside acceptable, and like, what's the upside? And just made sure all those things were fine. And honestly, it just made a lot of sense. And I just couldn't see, I was like, I know I can make this work, because it just dovetails so well with my experience. More strategically, like the course, I think right now is selling for like, a little under like 500 or something, like 497. I plan on eventually, really expanding it, adding, almost more of like more live components, more of like the hybrid, like in course mastermind, or like kind of semi like cohort based course approach. And, adding a lot more value, and focusing a lot more on delivering, a real outcome, and charging, making the investment much greater. And that, yeah, that's basically like how I think about it. I think like, I mean, a 497 course is great, especially if you have a huge audience. But in terms of getting people results, I just know that like people are going to get better results when there is a somewhat of a more kind of hands-on component. And there's a lot of interesting new kind of business models actually, that are emerging there, cohort based courses where there's like, you go through the course live, and, maybe it's like an 8 or 10 week course and you attend the trainings live and then there's a community. So, more broadly, I'm excited by the business right now, but like, I'm much more excited by like, those more, newer models that mix the kind of live as well as, video course.
That's a really good call out because, there's already an amazing infrastructure here, a course that people are paying money for, but there isn't a cohort-based course. He hasn't done too many experiments with pricing to get it to the $9.99 level or above. And with cohorts, geez, you can get into the thousands. So when you see this like green space or green field of where you can go after, it's like you have a great foundation where yes, obviously anything could drop, but you have all these things you could test. And I think when you look at an overall market, like it's only going to get bigger as people are like breaking out of the 9 to 5, doing their own thing, and productized services being an option. So I'm a big fan of trying to ride the waves that are getting bigger. And one thing, like I'm a little bit obsessed with this model. There's 2 guys we've had on the podcast. One, Tommy Griffith, who has ClickMinded. He used to run SEO at Airbnb, and now he has ClickMinded. He's tripled his revenue with some of the stuff they've done with selling templates and whatnot, in addition to their course, which that kind of blew me away. And then Craig Swanson, he just sold a course company for 8 figures, and he's done it like 10 times. And he gave his playbook. But no, man, I think you're very much playing in the right space with your skill set. Very, very cool.
Yeah, I think I think wrote that down in my Evernote. I was like, click-minded for productized services. Like, yeah, I love what Tommy Griffith has done over there. Like, super smart on so many ways, and how he bundles the courses, and yeah.
Yeah, talk about like inspired by the 4-hour work week. That guy, I think, is working 4 hours a month. Literally, he tracks it, and he doesn't boast too much about it. But I try and talk with him once a quarter. And it really pains me because I'm in deep agency mode where you know how that goes, where I'm not working 4 hours a month. It's a little bit more. But dude, I just love what you're doing. You want to tease anything else? Because you mentioned you're working on some other stuff. That's a lot though. You've got your productized service. You now have the course business. Are there other things that you have your eye on? Is you're kind of like, you've got your foundation of the Launchpad. Anything else that's top of mind?
Yeah. So one thing I have been doing is, some, one-on-one coaching with founders who want to get out of that founder sales bottleneck, mostly, agencies and productized services. So I've helped, a couple people now, basically like hire a sales rep and, get themselves out of, founder sales. I'm doing it like one-on-one right now to really like, make sure I can deliver, great results, but eventually and like understand the commonalities. And obviously it's something I've done, but I want to kind of see how it works for other people as well. And that might turn into a standalone course, or standalone, cohort based course. So that's something I'm passionate about because like, one of the guys that I helped, Carl over at Draft Dev, awesome product service. He was tweeting the other day. He's like, man, like the biggest lifestyle unlock is like not having to, be responsible for sales calls. Because if you think about it, like if you have to be
speaking to the audience, man.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you know exactly right. And I know you're also, this is how we connected. We've been chatting about this, but yeah, so that's something that I'm super into, and who knows? I mean, maybe that'll turn into a course or something.
Yeah, man, I think that's a course that people would pay a high dollar for. And I love these courses where you're niching down. People are afraid to go specific on it, but you're hitting on a pain point that is so real that people are like, take my money. Because if you solve this, it's a huge unlock. No, man, that's really cool. And the thing that you're doing that's really smart too is a lot of the services and companies you're standing up are very much aligned. So the personas overlap. So as you build an audience, you have multiple options of what they could go after and do. No, man, very cool. And so there's a question I always like to ask and end with, but like, as you look at your career to date, what's the nicest thing anyone's done for you professionally?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing that came to mind is that I was telling the story of the first entrepreneur that I worked for. This guy, named Mark Arvanigian, and he one time in my video agency pretty early, like we were like pretty close to like missing payroll, and I was like, hey, like, can you like, I know you need some video like for your business. Can you just like buy something? Like we need to make payroll. And he's like, yeah, sure. Like I'll buy something. We'll figure out like I'm sure I need a video made. And like basically like he, basically just like did that for me. And like, he's like, we didn't even have like a proposal or a topic. He's like, yeah, I'll buy something. Like we'll figure out what it is. I trust you. So that would absolutely, be like the nicest thing. And yeah, for sure.
That's such a great story. Like, we just please buy something so we can have money in our bank account.
Yeah. And yeah. And he obviously, like, I had worked for him. I had made him, when I worked for him, I made him a lot of money. And he, we had a great relationship and, on all that. So he was, more than happy to do it. But yeah, I think of that and definitely always appreciate it.
That's cool, man. That's why it's so important. Like, the places you work, you never want to burn those bridges. Always have good relationships. At the end of the day, it's a relationship game. But that's such a cool story. But dude, Sam, man, this is awesome. I love everything you're doing. I can't thank you enough for even helping me as we hired our VP of Biz Dev, which makes sense. That could be another venture for you. But if people want to learn more about what you're doing or your companies or follow your content, where can we point them?
Yeah. This has been a blast. Twitter is probably the best way to kind of, get in touch with me. I'm starting to be more active and share more on Twitter. It's just my name, Sam Shepler, at Sam Shepler. And then there's links in my profile to the course, but you can also visit, the course on, productized services that we talked about, but you can also visit that, directly at productizeandscale.com.
And Sam's Twitter is really good. I definitely recommend you guys following it if you want some free tips and advice. That's what I do. That's where I get all my news is Twitter. So I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing. But Sam, dude, thank you so much, man. This was a blast.
Likewise. Yeah, Jim, this was an absolute pleasure. I love your podcast. I listen to like every episode myself. So it's great to, get on and, share a little bit of my story.
Yeah, man. Well, we're going to have to bring you back after you do your next acquisitions and everything you're doing. But thank you.